Hello, every folks, and good morning. Welcome to another edition of Know Your Unit. Today we talk about the greatest and most versatile caster with the most unbreakable back in the game. That is to say, it's hard to break your back when it's already made of duct tape, but we're talking about the Lich today. Basically, this is, bar none, the most versatile caster that there is. Well, I say bar none. Okay, there's technically the Astromancer, which is basically a Lich with slightly different features, but let's go ahead and get into this here. So, why does this class matter? Well, unlike many of the other advanced casters, you can basically just get these guys more or less for free. They've got ridiculously wide access for all their spells. In fact, they've basically got almost everything on their list. They have everything from the entire availability of Necromancy to almost the entirety of Draconics, to the... Actually, I think they might literally have the entirety of Draconics. They have the entire Dark list, as well as pretty much everything but Divine on their pile. Everything but Divine heals and stuff like that. Now, that being said, they do have other options for those heals. Like, for example, instead of heals, they've got their Drain Hearts. Instead of exorcisms, they've got their banishes, that kind of thing. But this tends to lead to a class that is really, really good at adapting to everything, especially if you're playing manually. These guys are pretty much bar none the best caster in the game. So, let's go, as always, start off with their skills and kind of go from there. So, from the very top, they've got access to daggers, hammers, and cudgels. Basically, any one of these will do the job just fine. Personally, I usually will like running daggers, but it depends on who you're running with. So you got daggers, spellbooks, again, hammers, and cudgels. Now, again, this depends on the unit that you're running. So, like, for example, right here with drumstick here, nothing ever gets close enough to touch this guy, so realistically, like, if he ever does get into close range, he just uses life force. So, any one of the skills will do the job just fine. In the case of 99 Charisma Rick over here, if we were to swap him over for a book, because apparently I just gave him this thing and just never paid attention to it, unless you're using the Grand Grimoire, typically this isn't really something that you want to go for, but either way, if you wanted to have, like, let's say, a fairy smacking book because it's funny, and you wanted to give them some specific book finishers, there's technically that as an option. I don't really view books as being particularly kind of high tier for much of anything. Like, when it comes to books in particular, you got a racial bonus of 15%, you got a casting bonus that's equivalent to mid-game stabs, and then you kind of just suffer a defense penalty, so they're not exactly that great, and then the Grand Grimoire doesn't actually give you its stats, so either way. Generally speaking, unless you're just going for the funnies, I would probably stay away from spellbooks. Usually just cudgels, daggers, hammers, anything like that will do the job just fine. If you're running offhand Caldia's, hammers do give them a lot of solid options, whether you're looking to weaken stuff, whether you're looking for punishes against birds or that kind of thing. Or if you want to just, again, be extra funny and just use the cudgels for stuff like Trinity Pulse, you do have the option. But again, generally, I would probably recommend daggers in most situations. An offhand dagger gives them that parry option, while also giving them Shadow Pin, which means that if something gets too close, they can always try to inflict a stop on them. It's a better defensive option. By this late in the game, I would generally say they're probably going to have a harder time actually surviving a lot of things getting close. Either way, let's go ahead and just kind of leave it there. So yeah, if you're running Caldia, just run hammers. For many of them, just run cudgels, you'll be just fine. Books if you're feeling funny, and then daggers just give you that stop option. As far as their other skills go, they've got Insight, because of course they do. They've got Petrify and Charm, because of course they do. Demon's Pact, which is the only way to recruit Umbra units in the game. Basically, this would be stuff like your orcs and your gremlins and whatnot. Yeah, if you ever wanted to have those Agonal Scream gremlins, that's how you get them. Meditate 4, Engulf, Salvation, Nature's Touch, Reflection, and Concentration. However, that's not the full story, because this is also one of those classes that, well, a lot of folks will typically apply Ogre Blade skills to. So you could also add things like Lament of the Dead, the Slayer skills, as well as something like Intimidate on this pile as well. Basically anything from any unit that can use a two-hander can potentially transfer their skills over to this class. It's one of those things that many will do because it effectively doubles their intelligence and mind score while also giving them additional skills. So this is going to be a very powerful option for them. And bear in mind, this is a class that is already a massive powerhouse before you even get that far. So, for example, this is a completely unupgraded Ice Lich, so you've got multiple different flavors of Liches available. Your primary version is going to look a little bit like this, where they're forcefully transformed into dark, and then from that point, they will be, just running their dark spells. Usually, this will be the one running stuff like offensive summons here, as if there's defensive ones, but you get the point. Usually some kind of splash, some debuff, some recovery, that kind of thing. This is going to be again, their kind of standard form here. It's basically on par with all other endgame casters, but they aren't taking full advantage of their skills. So, going down that list in no particular order, Engulf, you know what Engulf does. Salvation is going to be a skill that essentially averages out the MP of all units in an area. So, essentially what this means is that they will be able to pretty much stand in a puddle of different units, and they will all be sharing their MP pool together. So if you have several units, like let's say, your archers or your knights or whatever else, that are pretty much building up MP without necessarily burning through it all, this creates a situation where they can either give themselves infinite MP, or they can potentially go and give additional MP to everybody that's around. So you can essentially create a death bubble of infinite MP using this. And essentially, if you have, typically I would recommend running Salvation first and then putting MP or Meditate later on the line, because this way they can essentially drain out their health pool to give their MP to everybody around them, essentially serving as a battery, and then Meditate comes in for replenishing their own MP pool at that point. So essentially, you just give one little auto card, and all of a sudden, infinite MP for multiple units. Then you also have Reflection over here, which is a unique ability to reflect 100% of magic back at the caster. Now, this is, again, going to happen in an area, meaning that there's a lot of bosses that can easily be just hard countered by this thing. Especially if you're having trouble getting the Sagara Cudgel, that's going to be this guy over here. A lot of the Heaven Generals will use offensive spells to hit you from really far away, and boy would it be a shame if their splash just happened to be hit in an area where everybody's got Reflect on them. They will just instantly delete themselves. So either way, very powerful skill under very specific circumstances. If you use it smart, you'll get some really great results. I wouldn't recommend keeping this on there for day-to-day purposes, because eventually you're going to want to heal them, and you're going to accidentally heal your healer instead. But again, with smart use, it's one of the most overpowered skills in the game, but it can potentially also be a hindrance under the wrong circumstances. Additionally, the Ring of the Dead, it's worth noting, while you can recruit these out in the wild basically for free, the Ring of the Dead can also give you flying liches. So if you wanted to, have a lich that had the ability to just flap around wherever the hell they please, you certainly have that option, because Hawkmen are still counted as human for the purposes of anything they consider something human. So this means that they uniquely can become liches. Now, this doesn't unfortunately work with orcs, lizards, anything like that, because they do not count as human, but this does give you a very powerful option in terms of having a, essentially ultimate spellcaster bird. Now, I would say that this is arguably the strongest version, but realistically, this is just kind of a fun novelty if you wanted to, create your own friggin' legendary bird. But instead of that, we have what I would consider the actual best final form of this whole thing, which is the Ice Lich. This is a guy that you get in Coda 1. You can get these in infinite amounts in Pirate's Graveyard. Essentially, go down to where you would have completed Azelston's side quest, down in, what was it, like Bosom of the Sea God or something? Whatever, that final room there. Anyway, you walk in there, and well, you just got these guys. Essentially, they're just going to spawn in with one on the left. It's a relatively easy fight. And this guy's unique in that he's actually able to take advantage of Nature's Touch. Now, just to point this out, Nature's Touch is already a pretty darn strong ability. It's a 50% boost to that next spell. The thing to understand about spells is that unlike melee attacks, ranged attacks, whatever else, their kind of incoming number is fairly flat. This is why when you're seeing things like Magic Up cards, or you're seeing something like Nature's Touch, where it's one of those rare occasions where it's actually giving it a sizable bonus, it's going to seem a lot stronger than it potentially is, because it doesn't, it's basically a good entry number. It doesn't necessarily scale as high as a lot of the other stuff. That's what summons are for. But In the case of this guy, the only thing that they're technically lacking would be, for example, an Ice Summon, which doesn't particularly matter that much, considering that a Ice Requiem or an Ice Blast 4, or even a upgraded Avalanche here, will typically be more than enough to, well, finish off multiple units outright. Even in a completely unupgraded state, this guy's intelligence is almost hitting 300 here. Again, this is just the out of the box thing here. If I were to go throw some charms on here, he pretty much would have higher stats than any unit on my first playthrough. So stats-wise, they're already a powerhouse to begin with. As far as their gear access, I mean, you get them something like the Sagara, and they're pretty much one-shotting stuff. The thing to understand is when we're comparing summons with everything else. So you've got multiple different categories of spells. So something like Ice Blast will essentially give you good penetration. It won't necessarily scale that high, but it'll also give you good range. Something like Ice Requiem is essentially going to be high power, high range in a splash, but it won't. It's going to be fairly expensive at 90 MP. Most classes cannot actually fund this, including stuff like oracles. They have access to the Apocrypha spells. They have a really hard time actually maintaining the upkeep to make it happen. And then you have something like your standard splashes, which are just a good day-to-day, nice big wide area there. But then you combine in the fact that they have access to necromancies, which means it gives them access to life force, which means that as soon as their meditate rolls once, they throw out a life force, and they are now completely able to fund something like not Draconics, but Apocrypha 2 for multiple rounds with no trouble before meditate even gets involved. And can get the 50% boost off of Nature's Touch, and can put Engulf on there, and can combine it with a staff. So they're essentially running around with plus 8 range, plus 50% damage on a spell that basically bypasses armor, and just dropping that in an entire area. If you get a crit card on them, this is oftentimes enough to even delete like post-game enemies. There's very few things that can actually survive a post-game Lich. So either way, that's just ridiculously strong when it ends up happening. This is even before, for example, putting something like a Spellcraft on them. They are very, 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 very strong right from the get-go. If you were wondering who the hell benefits the most out of Apocrypha spells, that would be these guys. Now, that being said, there's certainly cases to be made for something like Draconics in their hands as well. Because as you may have noticed, Draconics are very expensive, but you might have wondered, like, they don't seem that much stronger than many of the other splash spells, so what gives? They are essentially slightly better at performing against higher defenses in the later game. Many folks that will have already solidified their opinions on spellcasters ended the game in Chapter 4. There's 4 chapters that they haven't even played yet. So, when it comes to anti-armor performance, this matters. Standard splash spells have a much harder time actually performing in something like Code of 4, whereas something like Diablo's Spite would be able to punch through that reasonably well. Something like Apocrypha doesn't even care. But when it comes to general purpose stuff, this is going to be slightly better against defenses, and additionally, it's actually got a wider range on it as well. So Draconics are going to give you the widest damage range in the game. So for example, Splash 4 caps out at range 5 with an area of 3. Something like Draconics 2 is a range 6 of an area of 3 with a better overall damage performance there. So again, it is expensive, and in most classes, this would be a problem. In the case of the Lich, well, you got Life Force. So typically, the way that I like to run these guys is I'll go and open up with Life Force. I'll have a few of them running debuffs, like for example Charms and Poisons and whatnot. Typically, their mod scores have a tendency to be fairly high, so combined with something like Concentration, they can see very high hit odds on their debuffs. Additionally, something like Slow if you're just looking to set up a recruiter unit. Something like Draconics work really well in their hands, because again, they can actually afford to use it, so it's effectively just a direct upgrade over the standard splash spells there. And additionally, you've got other options, like if somebody gets downed, Styx Shift is a really good way to not only save units, but potentially use a knocked out unit to go block off a tile. There's a lot of very handy potential utility there. They're one of the classes that if you did get a couple of match up cards and a crit card, just like a Terror Knight, Drain Heart can give them a full health restore. They can potentially bypass something like a Reflection there. And additionally, again, if you wanted to get extra funny with it, there's nothing stopping you for example, from using a Terror Knight to go Ogre Blade into the Ice Lich to then, for example, replace one of their skills. Like, let's say instead of Meditate, we would have a Lament of the Dead there or something. Then you go ahead and give them the Stinky set. You march them forward, use Lament of the Dead, walk away, just hit everything with an Ice Requiem. Like, it's messed up. It's really, really good. And I want to point out, just as far as synergies go, we actually should probably just pop this on this guy right here. But when it comes to synergies, you really want to consider running these guys next to Terror Knights. Lament of the Dead, just kind of a front line of Lament of the Dead next to something like these guys is just fantastic. Actually, we're going to go ahead and replace Purple People Eater here with Diebold. Just kind of show a little bit of synergies and stuff like that you can run on all these guys. And I want to point out that when it comes to a lot of their bonuses, many will focus on offensive stats, which are fine, but there's a lot of things that you could potentially use your Ring of the Dead on that will give you a better benefit. Like, for example, Zapan over there had a pretty meaty health pool, and you may notice that even though he is a Lich, he still has 1,500 health. This is almost double the standard health amount here when it comes to Liches. The standard Liches, as you saw over there, are typically 800 or 900. They're fairly frail. You put them on a high health unit, you give them some good relics, nothing's touching that. On top of that, you can then also combine them in with any kind of debuff units in the front row to better emphasize the stuff that they do. Personally, I like running Cyclopes, I like running Octopi, I like running Terror Knights, just to drop a whole lot of debuffs and just give them a ton of opening room to get stuff done, you know? So for the purpose of convenience, we'll just go ahead and charge up one of our units right over here. Probably should have charged up Drumstick, but oh well. We're going to see a lot of their skills going off at the same time. This isn't really perfectly optimized for anything along the lines of their Salvation, but there's a lot of things that you can do with Salvation. For example, MP Stick into a Salvation unit means that you could potentially start off a fight by giving MP to, essentially giving a finisher to multiple units at once. If you're dividing this correctly, this could potentially mean that if, for example, I use the MP stick on this guy, he rolls his Salvation. If you had, as an example, several longbows that were running around with finishers, then potentially you could just step forward and drop all those finishers at once. They are, again, one of those units that's got a lot of utility in that way. Also, to point out, Zapan, who has trained entirely as a fighter his entire career, just by switching over to a Lich, is still able to hit an over-leveled endgame unit without needing concentration. With concentration, those hit odds would go up to about 60%, and this is, again, like, without any boosts to his mind, effectively speaking here. So, just to give you an idea of what we're working with here. Additionally, he's going to go ahead and Life Force this unit over here, and he now has 323 MP by round 2. MP sticks, get the hell out of here. There's a lot of this, and there's a lot of utility in the stuff that they do. And I want to point out that while Nature's Touch seems like something they should be going for in every scenario, there's exceptions and different things to consider. So, for example, Nature's Touch is by itself really powerful. You don't necessarily need to get the Element Match and the Nature's Touch at the same time. Just a Nature's Touch and Draconics is actually a pretty solid combo, even on a Dark Lich. It will be enough to see some pretty solid results. Their charm is 69%. That's just funny. Anyway, although he rolled his concentration, so there you go. And that was just a generic Birdman with, again, nothing upgraded about him. Anyway, let's see here. Oh yeah, so I was saying about Draconics and such. So this actually, it may not sound like it, but it actually is a pretty solid combo in their hands. They get their Nature's Touch, looks like he's going to get his Meditate, and it looks like we're going to get the full powerhouse treatment here, so we're just going to go ahead and drop a Avalanche over here. So this is, again, completely unupgraded. Now, granted, in this case, it's against a elemental advantage. Is everything... I think everything might be air over here. Okay, whatever. Let's find something that hopefully isn't air, that's also air. Okay, so even in this case, it's still a 300 starting number on a guy that's running a bunch of relics, right? So if you were to crit this, if you were to match up this, you can see how that would end up getting out of hand very quickly. Now, unlike many of the other endgame casters, they can afford to keep spamming this kind of stuff. Like, one Meditate is enough if, for example, they've got the range, to go ahead and get them their life force, go ahead and get them their 300 plus MP while still attacking. If you're applying this with a crit, potentially you could see several hundred more than that as well. Essentially, all of their stuff is going and combining in the same direction. It's all working together in tandem to just improve their situation, you know? So it's just a really generally good time with them. This is why I've regularly said that they're the best spellcaster in the game, because they've got all these options. They can fund things that nobody... They can cash the checks nobody else can cash. They cash the checks that shamans are constantly writing all day and falsely advertising themselves, okay? That's their whole deal. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, best spellcaster that there is. While I personally prefer something like Valks or Patriarchs or what have you due to their overall versatility, when I'm looking for an artillery unit, Lich, 100% of the time. Like, just their ability to have infinite MP, their ability to hit hard with absolutely everything, their ability to be consistent with absolutely everything, it's exactly what I'm looking for in a unit. So, it's just a generally good time, one of those units that can set up for itself, it can set up for others, and it can absolutely kick ass in the meantime. So, anyway, that will be about that. That's about all there really is to say about the Lich. They're really darn good. Oh, if you didn't know, if you were just looking to hire one, go to Pirate's Graveyard. Essentially, you can just hire them. There's multiple spawns of Liches in that area, which will just allow you to go hire them for free. Same thing for the Elemental Temples. More than likely, you can actually recruit multiple Liches on your way to go pick up a Shaman. So, you know, you get your improvement before you get the other thing. And then, yeah, if you want the Ice Lich, it is exclusively in Coda, in Coda 1. When you go back to Pirate's Graveyard, you'll see that they spawn on the left of the very final map there. And you can get as many as you'd like. It's just a random fight, so if you were to just go in and retreat every time you hired one, there's nothing stopping you from, for example, running an entire team of them. It's, yeah, it's pretty handy. And again, one of the best Draconic users as far as I'm concerned in the game, especially if you're running stuff like crits on there. It's, you know, just generally a good time. If you're running AI teams, you're not going to get as much utility out of the very many debuffs that they have access to. But again, generic unit versus overleveled unit still dropping 85% charms. I'm just saying that's pretty darn good, you know? Those debuffs and also extend to things like Paradigm Shift if you wanted to get extra cheeky with it. So Paradigm Shift is just really darn strong again for resetting turns. So for one thing I was doing for part of Palace of the Dead is running multiple Liches that essentially would all trade off casting Paradigm Shift and then repeatedly, essentially just repeatedly resetting each other's turns to be able to hit the same area over and over and over. And again, just to point this out right here, this is before match-up cards, crit cards, anything like that. Yeah, they're pretty good. But again, it just kind of comes down to paying attention to what they're good at and taking advantage of it. So it's not all about summons, guys. It's not all about summons. There's a lot of different spell types with a lot of different utility, and I accidentally hit myself. That's fine. It all reflected back on her. That's what you get. Why would you... Traitor. You know what? Absolute traitor over there. That was 100% her fault. Alright, anyway, I gotta get going. Y'all have yourselves a good one. Thank you for stopping by, and yeah, let me know what kind of weird stuff you came up with for Ogre Blade combos for these guys. Because again, they're one of those units that will benefit a ton from the Ogre Blade setup. I mean, I personally, first time through, I went a little bit lame with it. I just went and got a vigorous attack and just kept repeatedly abusing that just for free debuffs on the Patriarchs with their poison daggers, but either way, let me know what kind of stuff you guys came up with. So, y'all have yourselves a good one. Take care, and thank you for stopping by. Later.